What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Corey Hughes' Bloody History. So today what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up this collection of FBI documents on Lee Harvey Oswald's alleged trip to Mexico City. And, I don't know what we're going to do after this. I guess I'll have to figure it out. There's a lot more Mexico City to go over. So, here we go. Allegations by T-32. On November 25th, 1963, T-32 made contact with the United States Embassy at Mexico City and advised the following. T-32 entered Mexico illegally from Guatemala on August 29th, 63, traveled to Mexico City, and subsequently made contact with a Nicaraguan communist residing in Mexico City. From this contact, a plan was developed for T-32 to travel to Cuba to study guerrilla warfare tactics. He had on occasion to visit the Cuban consulate in Mexico City several different times for the purpose of obtaining travel documentation for Cuba by furnishing false identification papers as a Mexican citizen. He stated that on September 18th, 63, he went to the Cuban consulate and while sitting in the waiting room saw a group of approximately 8 persons enter the consulate and the office of Cuban consul Eusebio Azcue. A person unknown to him was sitting at Azcue's desk. A short time later, while the source was standing near the door to the men's room at the Cuban consulate, he noticed 3 men conversing a few feet away from him. One of them was a tall, thin Negro with reddish hair. The second was a man whom T-32 had seen previously holding a Canadian passport in the waiting room of the Cuban consulate. And the third person was Lee Harvey Oswald. Sources stated that a tall Cuban joined the above group momentarily and passed some United States currency to the Negro. All right, so here we have a major problem here, right? Because this is supposedly on September 18th. But we know that this can't be Oswald because Oswald never went to Mexico City, and we know that it's not Kerry Thornley because Kerry Thornley is in New Orleans at this time. So I believe this person's statement is completely false. The following conversation between the Negro and Oswald was overheard. The Negro says, "I want to kill the man." Oswald says, "You're not man enough, I can do it." The Negro then says, in Spanish, "I can't go with you, I have a lot to do." And Oswald says, "The people are waiting for me back there." T-32 stated that the Negro then gave Oswald $6,500 in United States currency, a large denomination, saying, "This isn't much of the sum. $1,500 was for expenses." The Negro also gave Oswald about 200 Mexican pesos. In a later interview, source stated that the United States banknotes were in a small pack about 1/4 of an inch by an inch thick, bound with a paper band, which the Negro broke before counting $1,500 extra for expenses and $5,000 as advance payment. T-32 stated that Oswald had carried a green passport in his pocket, and he believed he saw Oswald wearing a pistol in a shoulder holster, but he was not sure of this point. He stated that Oswald had long shoes and a wristwatch with a yellow metal band. According to the sources, Oswald appeared to be completely at home at the consulate and to be known by Cuban consulate personnel. T-32 was arrested and interrogated by Mexican authorities on November 28, 1963, and a copy of the interrogation report by the Mexican authorities revealed the following. At the outset, sources' story generally resembled that recorded above. He repeated to the Mexican authorities the details of the scene in which he saw the Negro, the Canadian, and the American conversing together, the delivery of the money by the American Negro, and the conversation he overheard. T-32 advises the interviewing Mexican officials that upon seeing the photograph of Oswald in the newspapers following the assassination of President John Kennedy, he recognized Oswald as the American that he had seen at the Cuban consulate. An excerpt from the source's statement to the Mexican authorities, as translated from Spanish, is as follows. Quote, "Spontaneously and after reconsidering, he desires to state that the American to whom he referred to in the body of his statement and whom he saw the 18th of September of this year in the Cuban consulate had a certain resemblance, about 60%, to Lee Harvey Oswald, assassin of the President of the United States. That after the assassination of President Kennedy, the witness took advantage of this fact in his favor to exploit it, furnishing versions such as those initially set forth for the purpose of provoking an energetic reaction from the political point of view on the part of the United States of American government against the government of Fidel Castro Ruiz, and that he had no motive other than the profound hatred he feels for communism. That all his life the witness had dedicated himself to combating communism, and he regrets at this moment not having accomplished his objective in the sense of causing a reaction on the part of the American government against Fidel Castro. So he was lying the whole time. Because of the fact that subsequent to making the above-mentioned statement to Mexican authorities, source claimed that he had changed his statement because of fear, he was interviewed at considerable length on December 5th and 6th, 1963, in Mexico City. After reiterating his story, T-32 was afforded a polygraph examination on December 6th, 1963, during the course of which examination he was asked, "Is this the American you saw in the Cuban consulate?" At the time, he was shown photographs of Oswald. Each time he was asked this question, he definitely responded yes, but it was noted that the polygraph indicated deception response of these answers. These responses and those with respect to the other questions led to the conclusion that T-32 was a fabricator. It was specifically pointed out to him that the polygraph indicated he was not being truthful in identifying photographs of Oswald as being of a person he saw in the Cuban consulate, and he was asked for his explanation thereof. He replied that he had full faith in the polygraph and would not attempt to refute its results. He went on to say that the only explanation he could offer was that he had seen an American in the Cuban consulate on September 18, 1963, who resembled Oswald, but that upon seeing the photograph of Oswald in the newspaper, he built up within himself, either consciously or subconsciously, a complete belief that the person he had seen in the Cuban consulate was Oswald. Miscellaneous inquiries and allegations relating to Oswald. Allegation by Salvador Diaz version concerning Oswald and Sylvia Duran. The White House at Washington, D.C. received a paper entitled Possible Psychological Motivations in the Assassination of President Kennedy, written by Jose I. Lasaga, 2340 Northeast 7th Avenue, Miami. The speculative paper attempted to establish that the motivation of Oswald in the assassination of President Kennedy was Fidel Castro or a Castro agent, and that Oswald was so motivated during his trip to Mexico between September 27th and October 2nd, 1963. The paper included the allegation that Oswald had an extended interview with the Cuban ambassador to Mexico, whom he met at a restaurant on the outskirts of Mexico City, from where they departed together in the Cuban ambassador's automobile for a private conversation. Lazaga had visited the White House, and he received the above report from Angel Fernandez Varela, an employee of the Voice of Cuba in Miami, who received the information from Salvador Diaz Verson, who reportedly was in Mexico City doing some investigative work after the Kennedy assassination. Salvador Diaz Verson was interviewed at Miami, Florida, and stated that while in Mexico City from November 20th to 29th, 1963, attending the Congress of the International Federation of Professional Newspaper Organizations, he was at the offices of the newspaper Excelsior on the night of November 25th, 1963. He learned through the Mexican press that the Mexican government had arrested one Sylvia Duran, that Duran allegedly had Oswald at a guest in her house during his visit to Mexico, and that Duran had placed Oswald in contact with officials of the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. Diaz version claimed that Dr. Burrell Navarros, an exiled Cuban newspaperman employed by Excelsior, told him that on the day following Oswald's arrival in Mexico City, Oswald and Duran went to a restaurant called the Calabo Blanco, or possibly the Calabo Bayo, where they met an official of the Cuban embassy. Diaz Verson claimed he knew nothing about Oswald and the Cuban officials having left the restaurant together in a car. T3 advised that on January 11, 1964, Dr. Eduardo Burrell Navarro, a former Cuban cabinet minister who on occasions writes feature articles for the Mexico City daily newspaper Excelsior and resides at 1303 Homero Street, furnished the following information. Salvador Diaz Verson was in Mexico City as he had claimed and discussed Oswald with Burrell and other Cuban exiles. Diaz Verson also visited Burrell at the latter's home. Burrell did not corroborate the story credited to him by Diaz Verson concerning the visit to a Mexico City restaurant by Oswald and Sylvia Duran. Burrell stated he had never heard this story or anything similar. Burrell knew of no meeting between Oswald and Cuban embassy officials other than the meetings which allegedly occurred at the time Oswald visited the Cuban consulate in Mexico City. Burrell knew nothing concerning any visits by Oswald to the home of Duran. On January 17, 1964, T5 advised that he had been unable to locate a Caballo Blanco restaurant in Mexico, but stated there is a Caballo Bayo restaurant located on the outskirts of Mexico City. Source stated that it is a very large, typical Mexican restaurant which does a thriving business. Source advised that on January 11, 1964, the photographs of former Cuban consul Eusebio Azcu Lopez, who was in charge of the Cuban consulate at the time of Oswald's visit, of Cuban ambassador Joaquin Hernandez Armas, of Sylvia Duran, and of Oswald were shown to the employees of the Caballo Bayo restaurant, and extensive interviews among the employees of this restaurant were conducted without locating anyone who could recognize any of the photographs of the persons mentioned above as having been at the restaurant. Information furnished by Robert Kaffke, Kaffke, on February 27, 1964, Robert Kaffke appeared at the United States Embassy in Mexico City and identified himself as having been a member of a student group which visited Cuba in 1963. He explained that he had come to Mexico City to seek contact with the Cuban embassy in the hope of arranging another trip to Cuba or to obtain the assistance of making arrangements to travel to Communist China as an observer of a teacher. He mentioned that he had made some inquiries with respect to the visit to Mexico City of Lee Harvey Oswald in the hope that he could develop an angle which would enable him to write a saleable magazine article. Kaffke furnished the following background data concerning his interest in Oswald's activity in Mexico. He stated within the recent past, Mark Lane, an attorney for Mrs. Marguerite Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, had visited San Francisco, California, on a lecture tour, and Kaffke had attended the lecture and had spoken to Lane at some length after the lecture. Lane told Kaffke that, quote, the FBI is so convinced Oswald was responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy that it has ignored other witnesses and failed to follow up various leads. Lane claimed to have seen an affidavit in the possession of the Dallas Police Department reflecting that the paraffin tests made of Oswald had disclosed powder burns on his hands but not on his cheek, suggesting from this that he might have fired a handgun on the day of the assassination, but not a rifle. Lane advised Kaffke that he had located 4 women newspaper reporters who were between the underpass and the point from which the assassination shots were allegedly fired, and these women had expressed the belief that the shots they heard had seemingly originated from opposite direction from the Texas Schoolbook Depository, where Oswald reportedly was employed. According to Lane, the 4 reporters had claimed that upon hearing the shots from the direction of the underpass, they turned in time to see a puff of smoke and figures running along the bridge over the underpass. Lane also told Kaffke that he had seen or had in his possession a second affidavit to the effect that 5 spent bullets had been located following the assassination rather than the 3 bullets which had been publicized in the United States press. He referred to those alleged projectiles as follows. 1, a bullet which appeared on the stretcher, which was utilized in removing President Kennedy from the official limousine. 1 bullet which lodged in the thigh of Governor Connally. 1 bullet which struck Governor Connally in the chest. A bullet which was found embedded in the presidential limousine. And a bullet which was found on the grass adjacent to where the automobile had been at the time of the shooting. Kaffke quoted Lane further to the effect that the latter had information that the 2 days prior to the assassination, a huddle was taken at a place of Jack Ruby's Carousel Club, with the participants being Ruby, Tippit, the Dallas policeman allegedly killed by Oswald, and an individual whose name Kaffke was unable to recall, but whom he described as the man who had published a full-page advertisement in a Dallas newspaper shortly prior to the assassination, charging President Kennedy with being a communist. Might be talking about Seymour Weiss. Or Weissman, I forget his exact name. Kaffke expressed reluctance to discuss the above-described meeting, stating that the information had been obtained by Lane from a very confidential source, the identity of whom he was not aware, and he referred to the information concerning the meeting as being real dynamite. He commented that if the meeting had taken place, it suggested a conspiracy of the radical left or radical right, and added that perhaps Tippit had meant to shoot Oswald. He stated that possibly Oswald killed Tippit contrary to the conspiracy, and it became necessary for Jack Ruby to kill Oswald. Kaffke denied that his trip to Mexico had been financed in any way by Attorney Lane, but stated that he had advised Lane of his intention of traveling to Mexico, to which Lane replied that he would be interested in anything he might pick up. Allegation by Robert Edmund Gallant, Santa Clara Prison Farm, Santa Clara, California, that Oswald was in the Cuban embassy in Mexico City on July 12th of 1963. On November 16, 63, Edmund Gallant, also known as Robert James Gallant, Robert Edward Gallant, and General Roberto Edmundo Cortez addressed a letter to the United States Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy from Milpitas, California, where Gallant was incarcerated in a jail farm. In this letter, Gallant alleged that he had been supplying the United States government with vital information as to the communist movement in Latin American countries, mainly Cuba, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. He wrote that he held the rank of general in the secret underground movement in Mexico, that he was known as General Roberto de Edmundo Cortez, director of the Secret Army of Mexico, and that the Mexican government did not approve of this movement because its top brass is 100% communist, both in the government party and the military. In the letter, Gallant advised that he had sent a long letter to President J.F. Kennedy pertaining to this matter. He then furnished information regarding the alleged shipment of arms and ammunition to Cuba. He stated that he had been risking his life for the last 4 years to obtain information on the inside of the communist movement, and that if he were given his freedom to carry on his work, he would do all in his power to aid the United States government obtaining information from Cuba throughout to Mexico. Gallant was interviewed at Santa Clara County Jail on January 7, 64, and advised the following. After stating that he was born on March 19, 1922, and furnishing background information to the effect that he was arrested by Texas authorities at Houston, Texas, for a burglary and had served 7 years at the Texas State Prison at Huntsville, Texas, he related other experiences of his life until 1960. He moved to Mexico, where he resided until the fall of 1963, which at time he was arrested by Mexican authorities and deported to the United States for having written fraudulent checks. Gallant stated further that he had been active in the anti-Fidel Castro underground in Mexico for the past few years under the name General Roberto de Edmundo Cortez, and that he had under his command a secret army of 3,500 men throughout Mexico, and that his group was an anti-Castro force concentrating its activities against Cuban communists in Mexico. He claimed to have a secret agent working in the Cuban embassy in Mexico City and alleged that Oswald was in the Cuban embassy on July 12, 1963, to obtain a visa to Cuba and had stayed in Mexico for about 1 week at that time. Gallant's allegations concerning his underground movement were unknown in Mexico, and the results of polygraph examination of Gallant were furnished on January 8, 64. It's being the opinion of the examiner that Gallant was suffering from delusions and that his story, as summarized above, was untrue. Allegations by Hector Francisco Serrano. T-17 advised as follows. On November the 26th, 1963, a local newspaper editor at Guadalajara, Mexico, was reported to have stated that on Monday, November 25th, 63, he was visited by one Hector Francisco Serrano, a news photographer from Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico, who told the newspaper editor that in late September 63, he traveled by bus from Culiacan to Mexico City with Lee Oswald. Serrano related that they had attempted to converse through Oswald's, but Oswald's Spanish was poor, and Oswald gave Serrano a personal card and pamphlet in English with many pictures of Fidel Castro, both of which later were discarded. Serrano reportedly told the newspaper editor that upon arrival in Mexico City, he noted Oswald's baggage included a rifle and a leather case. This is nonsense. T-23, a confidential source abroad, advised as follows. On December 2nd, 63, Hector Francisco Serrano, Calle Rosales, number 477, advised that in September 63, he had taken a Tres Estrellas de Oro, 3 gold stars, bus from Culiacan to Mexico City, arriving about September 29th, 63. On the way to Mexico City, a person took a seat next to him from Guadalajara. He described this person as having facial characteristics similar to Oswald and the same apparent age. He related that this person had talked to him in a very poor Spanish on the trip from Guadalajara to Mexico City. He stated that he had seen Oswald on television. Serrano related that he is a newspaper photographer, and when the Soviet astronaut Gagarin arrived in Mexico about October 10th, 63, he went on to the airport to meet him. Being in the crowd, Serrano was pushed to the front and personally talked to Gagarin. Serrano stated that he was surprised to see the same individual who had been next to him on the bus at the airport at the reception for Gagarin. Serrano advised that many photographs were taken of the Gagarin airport reception, and among the photographs which were taken was one which appeared on the front page of the October 12th, 1963 issue of Ovacion, a Mexican City daily newspaper of which Serrano appeared with Gagarin. Serrano expressed the belief that in the background of one of the photographs is the person he saw on the bus and again at the airport reception. T17 advised that a review of the photographs appearing in the October 1263 issue of Ovacion revealed that Oswald definitely does not appear in any of the photographs. Serrano advised that the above-mentioned bus from Culiacan to Mexico City arrived in Mexico City about September 29th, 1963. However, Oswald apparently entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on September 26, 1963, and is reported to have traveled by bus from Nuevo Laredo to Mexico City, where he arrived on September 27th and was registered at Mexico City Hotel from September 27th until October 1st or 2nd. Allegation by Luis Fernandez Gonzalez. On December 2nd, 63, a person who identified himself as Luis Fernandez Gonzalez contacted the United States Embassy, Mexico City, and advised that he had some interest concerning Lee Harvey Oswald. Fernandez claimed he resided at the Hotel Calle Mosquito, number 200, Mexico City, that he was born on September 28, 36 at someplace in Honduras, and that his only living relative is his mother, Aurora Gonzalez, who resided at Avenida 28 de Marzo on number 1300 in Honduras. He indicated that he is in Mexico illegally, having entered the country at Tapachula, Chiapas, on or about September 1963. Fernandez claimed to be a member of the Movimiento de Liberación Nacional in Mexico City, and in connection therewith was acquainted with one Saul Lopez, whom he described as press chief of the National Liberation Movement. The Movimiento Liberación Nacional, which was formed organizationally at Mexico City in August of 61, is an anti-United States pro-communist organization under the partial influence of the Partido Comunista Mexicano. The published statuses of the Partido Comunista Mexicano state the Communist Party of Mexico has its final objective to construct socialism and to build a communist society in Mexico. Fernandez related that on or about September 28, 1963, he met an American whom he came to know as John White on the street in front of the Hotel Reforma in Mexico City, and again saw this person September 29, 63, in front of the same hotel. Fernandez stated he has seen newspaper photographs of Oswald and was of the opinion John White greatly resembled Oswald. On September 29, 1963, he accompanied White and Saul Lopez in Lopez's 59 Ford Galaxy to Cuernavaca, Morelos, where they spent the day swimming and entertaining themselves at the Hotel Casino de Selva, but did not register at the hotel. Fernandez stated that he last saw John White on September 30th, 63, when White and Lopez left Mexico City, traveling to Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, in Lopez's automobile. Fernandez described White as being about 23 to 24, about 5 foot 6 inches in height, and weighing about 110 pounds. He claimed that White could speak fairly good Spanish and seemed very familiar with the Mexico City area. Fernandez stated he had nothing further to offer bearing on Lee Harvey Oswald, but added that he was in need of assistance to go to the United States or elsewhere out of Mexico because he feared that he would be apprehended by the police in Mexico City and jailed if he were found in Mexico without proper documentation. He advised he was without funds and had no gainful employment. He was badly in need of a shave and had an unkempt appearance. On December 4th, 63, Fernandez presented an undated passenger ticket stub, number 46218, of the bus line known as Transporte del Norte, which he claimed to have given him by White on September 28, 1963, to have his baggage picked up at the Transporte del Norte bus station. Fernandez at this time again revealed he was in need of assistance to leave Mexico and enter the United States. T7 advised on December 4th, 63, that inquiry at Transporte del Norte bus line in Monterrey revealed that ticket number 46218 had been sold on November 30th, 1963. Fernandez claimed to have been furnished the ticket stub with that number on September 28th, 1963. On December 19th, 63, T6 reported that Fernandez had been detained by Mexican immigration authorities in Mexico for investigation concerning his alleged illegal entry into Mexico and to clarify his citizenship status. It was subsequently learned from T6 that on January 15, 64, Fernandez had been deported from Mexico to Honduras in view of his continued claim of Honduran citizenship. On March 17th of 64, source advised that investigation by Mexican government had revealed that Luis Fernandez Gonzalez actually was a Mexican citizen and that he was considered to be insane. Source also stated that Fernandez's mother had been an inmate of a mental institution in Mexico. On March 23rd, 64, T6 advised that Fernandez had returned to Mexico from Honduras without permission of Mexican immigration authorities, and again had been detained on March 4th of 64 for questioning as a result of information received by Mexican authorities that he had claimed to have information concerning a planned attempt against the life of French President Charles de Gaulle, incidental to de Gaulle's March 16th, 1964 visit to Mexico. Source related that investigation by Mexican Ministry of Government had established that Fernandez's true name is Manuel Santamarina Mendez. He stated that two Mexican city attorneys, Agustin Santamarina Jr., Avienda Reforma number 76, office number 3, and Fernando Arc Santamarina, Avienda Reforma number 76, office number 1, Mexico City, personally identified Fernandez as their cousin and informed the Mexican investigators that Fernandez's mother, Aura Mendez de Santamarina, is mentally afflicted and his father, Carlos Santamaria, is deceased. The two attorneys described their cousin as mentally unbalanced and as a person who is well known for inventing fantastic falsehoods. Source stated that Fernandez of Santamarina had been released from custody on March 20th, 64, after inquiries had clearly established his Mexican citizenship, and Mexican authorities were convinced that most of his statements were unreliable or completely false. Allegation of Robert Himes. On December 13th, 63, Robert Himes, 301 Isaac Garza, Monterrey, Mexico, furnished the following information. On or about November 6, 1963, Oswald allegedly entered Mexico at Ojinaga, Chihuahua, and proceeded south through the Republic of Mexico to the state of Michoacan, where he conferred with General Lázaro Cárdenas. Himes stated this information was given to his son David by General Cilicia, commandant of the military garrison at Ojinaga, Chihuahua. Himes had no further particulars as to how Oswald was traveling or any additional information regarding that matter. Himes advised that his son David was engaged to marry the daughter of General Cilicia, and during his early December visits to Ojinaga, the general had made the above statement. In connection with the allegation, it is noted that Mr. H.S. Aiken, bookkeeper, Texas School Book Depository, Dallas, Texas, on November 25th, made available official payroll records for the Texas School Book Depository, which reflected Oswald first worked for this company on October 16, 1963, and worked continuously 8 hours per day from October 16, 63 through November 22, 63 without missing a day's work. During this period of time, he was off duty on Saturdays and Sundays, and November 11th, 1963, which was a company holiday. It is noted in his connection that November 6th, 63 was a Wednesday. Hang on a second. I'm just having some thoughts here. Okay. So he had November 11th, 63 off. And it was November 10th of 1963 that Seymour was seen at the Carousel Club drinking it up. So obviously he couldn't have been there the next day. I really wish that I could make a comprehensive timeline of all this stuff, but God, it would take me forever. Also, let's pull everything on Mr. H.S. Aiken, A-I-K-E-N, bookkeeper, Texas School Book Depository. Why have I never heard this fucking name? I thought Joe Molina was the bookkeeper of the Texas School Book Depository. So yes, we need everything on Mr. H.S. Aiken, A-I-K-E-N, bookkeeper, Texas School Book Depository. Like stat. Allegation by Andrew Champion that a friend of Francis H. Fiedler of New Orleans, Louisiana, was Oswald. T7, who had occasion to interview Andrew Champion of Donna, Texas at Calle Paris number 213, Montemorelos, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, advised on January 2nd, Champion made the following statement. Champion, who was born on October 14th, 1900 in Santa Maria, Texas, and served in the United States Marines in World Wars I and II, in 1952 or 53, had become acquainted with Frank H. Fiedler, also known as Francis H. Fiedler, at the Buena Vista Hotel in Cuernavaca, Morelos, Mexico. Fiedler had stated that he was working on his doctor's thesis at the University of California, Berkeley, California, that he was a teacher, that his studies were in space work, and that he was mistreated in the United States because he was Jewish. In November 1960, Champion received a letter from Fiedler dated October 8, 1960, which was addressed from 912 North Rampart Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. And in this letter, Fiedler stated he was going to visit the Rio Grande, that he was an American refugee from Cuba, and that he had given up his position as professor of literature at the University of Hawaii because of Castro. On November 7, 1962, Champion received another letter from Fiedler, and on January 1st, 1963, two men suddenly appeared at Champion's home in Donna, Texas. One of the men was identified later as Jack J. Frazier. Oh, shit. 910 North Rampart Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. A neighbor of Fiedler's, Frazier, represented a letter to Champion from Fiedler in which the latter asked Champion to assist the two men in parking their car and in obtaining obstructions concerning travel in Mexico. Hey, if you'll not remember, Jack Frazier was the name that was listed by Jules Rico Kimball as having gone to David Ferry's house and Guy Bannister's place after they both died and broke in there, right? Jack Frazier allegedly also connected to was it the Ryder or the Riley Coffee Company? One of those. I think it was the Ryder Coffee Company. The second man, whose name Champion never learned, stated that the two of them possibly were going to spend their vacation in Veracruz or Tampico, and asked for the names of some inexpensive hotels at these places. The two men took 2 sea bags, presumably full of clothes, and on the afternoon of January 1st... Guys, let's pull everything on Jack Frazier once again. I know we've already done it, but let's do it again. Presumably all full of clothes, on the afternoon of January 1st, 63, departed on foot towards Mexican border, stating they were going to cross into Mexico at Brownsville, Texas. On January 29th and 30th, 63, Frazier returned by himself, stating that he had been in Tampico and that his friend and had decided to stay another month. Frazier left in his automobile after he had identified himself as the owner of the Ryder Coffee House, home and gallery, 910 Rampart Street. With the publication of Oswald's picture in the national press on the day of President Kennedy's assassination, Champion concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald was identical with the second man who he visited on his home on January 1st of 63. Okay, so now this is important. This is actually very important. I can't screenshot this on this goddamn browser. But this is important stuff, okay? This connects that, obviously it wasn't Oswald, it was obviously Kerry Thornley, and this ices the relationship between Jack Frazier and Kerry Thornley having gone to Mexico together sometime in January of 63, which is a definite possibility, right? It's a definite possibility. The government really wasn't tracking any movements of Oswald in January of 63 going to Mexico City. Champion stated that on December 1st, 63, on his return from a trip to Mexico, he learned that he had received a letter from Fiedler advising that he probably would visit the Rio Grande Valley in the near future, and Champion's wife had dispatched a letter to Fiedler stating that Champion would not be home for 4 months. This letter was mailed on November 23rd, 63, to 1123 Bergen Street, New Orleans. From Time magazine, issued after the assassination of President Kennedy, Champion has clipped an article wherein it was set out that a Wesley Frazier had driven Oswald to work on the morning of the assassination, and Champion wondered if there was any association between the two Fraziers and the information that Oswald had resided in New Orleans. Champion stated that with this information, he became more convinced that the man who visited his home on January 1st, 63 was Oswald. Subsequent to the foregoing, Jack J. Frazier, 2106 Chantres Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, advised in January 64 he had made a trip into Mexico in late December 62, accompanied by Howard Cohen, 611 Esplanade, New Orleans. Let's pull everything on Howard Cohen, please, in New Orleans. And he stated that he and Cohen toured the east coast of Mexico, went to Acapulco, Guerrero, Mexico, and then returned to New Orleans on about February 1st of 63. Frazier advised he did not know Lee Harvey Oswald and that Howard Cohen in no way resembled Oswald. This is some interesting stuff here. Allegations by Alberto Godoy, Godoy, that film in his possession might depict Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby together. January 13th, Sanders F. Rosenblum of the United States Information Service, United States Embassy, Mexico City, advised that a Mexican attorney named Alberto Godoy appeared at the U.S. Embassy and related the following information. At 9:30 a.m. on January 14, 64, he was planning a private showing at the Cine Versailles, Mexico City, of a film on the Cuban Revolution, which he had in his possession. Godoy had seen this film 2 years previously, and although he was not certain, he thought it possible that the film depicted an individual who possibly was identical with Lee Harvey Oswald and another person who possibly was identical with Jack Ruby. Godoy was not certain that the individuals in the film were identical with Oswald and Ruby, and was anxious that an observation of the film be made on January 14, 1964. T2 advised on January 14, 1964 that when contacted on the morning of the date, Godoy advised that the film had been shown on January 13, 1964, and that there was no one available at the Cine Versailles to run the film again. He stated that reel number 4 of the film was important because it depicted Cuban Premier Fidel Castro's entry into Havana, Cuba at the conclusion of the Cuban Revolution, and includes shots of throngs of people, which could be enlarged to possibly identify Oswald or Ruby as being in the crowd. He made no allegation of having seen or identified Oswald or Ruby in these crowds because he had seen the film 2 years before this. He stated that many communists were present when Fidel Castro entered Havana, and that he believed that Oswald and Ruby could have been members of these crowds in Havana. On January 14, 1964, he was shown photographs of Oswald, and he was not familiar in any way with the appearance of Oswald. He was also shown a photograph of Ruby, who could furnish no information reflecting that Ruby was shown in the film. On January 14, 1964, Godoy reappeared at the United States Embassy in Mexico City with reel number 4 of his film, and stated that this primary interest was to sell the film to the United States Embassy for the price of $1,000 for the 4 reels of film. Godoy furnished no concrete data to substantiate the allegation made by him on January 13th of 1964 that Oswald and Ruby be depicted in his film. Godoy, who appeared to be from 65 to 70 years of age, was unshaven and shabbily dressed, and furnished his address as 128 Calle Bucareli, Mexico City. All right, moving on. Letter to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy from Ernesto Flores Luna. A typewritten letter in Spanish, postmarked January 17, 1964, at Mexico City, was sent to Attorney General Robert Kennedy by one Ernesto Flores Luna, not further identified. This letter alleged that there were possibly certain documents at the residence of Victor Cohen, Cohen, owner of a shoe store in Tapachula, Chiapas, Mexico, and allegedly an inmate friend of Fidel Castro of Cuba, which concerned contacts by a clerk of Cohen's shoe store and an unidentified man who delivered shipments of documents from him to Oswald and 3 other persons not named who were to assassinate President Adolfo López Mateos of the Republic of Mexico. This letter stated that the writer of the same was taking the liberty of reproducing with care certain documents which arrived from Tapachula addressed to Oswald. The writer of the letter alleged that Cohen was Fidel Castro's treasurer, and that Cohen had kept individuals of different nationalities in his house, including Oswald. There were no enclosures to the above letter, and the identity of the writer could not be established. T30, a confidential source abroad, advised as follows. On February 11th, 1964, A.R. Gehrke, Gehrke, British vice consul at Tapachula, advised that he was not acquainted with Victor Cohen, but would make an inquiry concerning him. Gehrke subsequently advised Cohen that he is the owner of the store La Nacional at 3 Calle Poniente, number 35, which handles shoes, clothes, clothing, and general merchandise. He stated Cohen is considered to be a respectable businessman, but is suspected of dealing in contraband. On February 11th, 1964, Lieutenant Jorge Aguiar Perez of the Mexican Federal Highway Police at Tapachula advised that he knew Cohen well, and that Cohen would not involve himself personally in illegal activities for political reasons. He knew of no pro-Castro groups or activities in the Tapachula area. Jose Polito Morales, head of Mexican Immigration Services at Tapachula, advised on February 11, 1964, that he was well acquainted with Cohen, whom he described as a prosperous local merchant. He stated that because of Cohen's alleged contraband activities, he has tried without success to follow Cohen's activities and establish evidence of violation of Mexican laws. He stated that during the course of his investigation, he learned of no contacts by Cohen with North Americans or other foreigners. He stated he believed it to be ridiculous to believe that Cohen would do anything for political motivation. He was certain that Cohen was not pro-Fidel Castro and that there were no pro-Castro groups in Tapachula. Victor Cohen Sharaff, Charaff, who was the son of Isaac Cohen and considered identical with Victor Cohen Sharaff, Scharaff, a white male Mexican born July 1933 at Tuxtepec, Oaxaca, Mexico, 5'7" tall, weighing 147 pounds, with brown hair and eyes, fair complexion by occupation, a clothing merchant, bearer of Mexican passport number 282800, issued September 7th of 1959, advised as follows on February 1164 at his store at Tapachula. He's not interested in politics concerning the United States, Cuba, or any other nation. He is not pro-Castro, and he's never belonged and never will belong to any pro-Castro organization. He stated that because he is a prosperous businessman and Jewish, he has many enemies. The name Ernesto Flores Luna had no significance to him. He claimed he had no contact with any North Americans or other foreigners during the previous year, that no North Americans or other foreigners have been in his house or rental units, and that none of his 40 employees are pro-Castro. He was unfamiliar with Oswald and unable to identify Oswald from a group of photographs he exhibited to him. He recalled reading that Oswald had visited Mexico, but knew nothing further concerning this visit. Victor Cohen Sharaff was cooperative in furnishing samples from his typewriter for determination as to whether this typewriter was used in preparing the letter forwarded to Attorney General Kennedy. Result of FBI laboratory examination of the typewriter samples. The original and carbon copy samples from the typewriter of Victor Cohen was submitted to the FBI laboratory for comparison with the typewritten letter directed to Robert Kennedy by Ernesto Flores Luna. The FBI laboratory concluded in a report dated March 3rd that the typewriter used to type the sample submitted from Victor Cohen's typewriter was not used to type the envelope and accompanying letter forwarded to Senior Robert Kennedy from Ernesto Flores Luna. Additional efforts to identify Ernesto Flores Luna in Mexico City. T4 advised that throughout February, March, and April 1964, the following efforts were made to locate and identify Ernesto Flores Luna in Mexico. The only reference which could be located in the files of the numerous Mexican government agencies checked for the name Ernesto Flores Luna was a December 5th, 1959 application for Mexican Social Security registration as an employee of the constructor Valle de Bravo, S.A., Brave Valley Construction Company. This individual indicated he was born in 1922 and resided at Sierra Mojada, Lot 51, San Isidro, Tecamacalo, State of Mexico. His wife was listed as Margarita Delgado Pedraza. He was registered with Mexican Social Security number 15322-157. T4 conducted the following inquiry. At the Constructoro Valle de Bravo, it was determined that no record could be located of the employment of Ernesto Flores Luna. The Constructoro Valle de Bravo was formed in 1959 when this concern was engaged in the construction of a house development known as San Esteban in Mexico City, and the firm and its subcontractors employed thousands of temporary workers. It was suggested at the Constructoro Valle de Bravo, S.A., that Ernesto Flores Luna might have been employed by one of the subcontractors, as he was known to the parent firm. Neighborhood inquiries in San Isidro, State of Mexico, which immediately adjoins the federal district, failed to locate any information on Ernesto Flores Luna. According to T4, no documentation is necessary to apply for a Social Security registration in Mexico, and any identity may be assumed in making such an application. Source pointed out the fact that there has been no other activity or entry with respect to this registration may indicate the registration of Ernesto Flores Luna was fictitious, since efforts to identify Luna through numerous other sources has been unsuccessful. Information from Jose Garcia Luchichi, that American woman in Monterrey, Mexico, telephoned Dallas before and after assassination of President Kennedy. On January 3rd, 1964, Jose Garcia Luchichi, a former employee of the United States Embassy in Mexico City and a reporter for The News, an English-language daily newspaper published in Mexico City, furnished the following information to the Regional Security Office. United States Embassy, Mexico City. An unidentified American woman who had rented a room in Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico from Guadalupe de Villarraiz at Columbia 345 in Monterey had telephoned Dallas, Texas from Monterey several times prior to the assassination of President Kennedy and again following the assassination. The unidentified woman allegedly revealed that she was very happy upon learning of President Kennedy's death and allegedly played happy tunes on the piano thereafter. The woman's conduct reportedly was so offensive to Miss Guadalupe de Villarraiz that she was asked to leave, and the woman's whereabouts was not known. T31, a confidential source abroad, advised on January 15, 1964 at Monterrey, Mexico, that Miss Guadalupe de Villarraiz stated that the above allegations were completely unfounded and without any basis whatsoever. Allegations that Steve Kennan might have met Oswald in Mexico. New section. T2 advised as follows on January 22, 1964. Homo Bono Alcatraz Aragon, a graduate student of the University Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, commented on an alleged statement he made the latter part of December 1963 that a young American, Steve Kennan, described by Alcatraz Aragonin as a pro-communist from some city in Pennsylvania, might have had something to do with Oswald. Alcaraz Aragon advised that when Kennan was in Mexico in 1962 and 1963, he apparently was unsuccessful in securing a visa from Cuban authorities for travel to Cuba. Alcatraz Aragon stated that he could not identify photographs of Oswald as identical with anyone ever observed in Kennan's company in Mexico or as anyone he had ever seen. Aragon claimed to have no knowledge which would place Kennan in contact with Oswald. On April 27, 1964, Aragon was re-interviewed and stated very positively that he had never seen Oswald and had no personal knowledge whatsoever concerning Oswald's travel to and activities and contacts in Mexico City. He advised that he can be located in Mexico City at Calle Chiapas, number 160. Information from Arturo Alcocer Ruiz. T10 advised that on November 27, 1963, attorney Arturo Ruiz, Calle Masaryk in Mexico City, furnished the following information. At approximately 9 a.m. on November 21, 1963, he and his wife, Dolores Ajedo de Alcocer, upon departing the Gunter Hotel in San Antonio, Texas for a shopping tour, had observed a very obese woman who was wearing glasses and green cotton dresses, was about 50 years of age, about 5'7" tall, with dyed blonde hair, weighing about 200 pounds. The woman was standing in front of Carl's store near the Gunter Hotel. Upon returning to the vicinity of the Gunter Hotel about 1 p.m., they again saw the same woman still standing at the same location. At the time, President John F. Kennedy was passing down the street in a caravan, and they observed the woman leave the area after the presidential procession had gone by. On November 22, 1963, following the assassination of President Kennedy while still in San Antonio and while watching a television interview of the manager of the guest house where Oswald stayed in Dallas, Texas, the television camera during the course of that interview picked up the same fat woman they had seen in San Antonio the previous day. On November 24, 1963, Alcocer and his wife were watching a television program in San Antonio following the shooting of Oswald and Jack Ruby, and while Ruby's sister was being interviewed on television, they became certain that Ruby's sister was identical with the fat woman. Now that is some interesting stuff here. Alcocer expressed the belief that the foregoing information might possibly indicate involvement of Jack Ruby and his sister as conspirators in the assassination of President Kennedy. Information that Ernesto Rodriguez, New Orleans, Louisiana, possessed tape recordings of Oswald's Spanish. T17 advised as follows. On November 27, 1963, a widow named Mrs. Maria Rodriguez de Lopez made the statement in Mexico City, Mexico, that her son-in-law, a Cuban named Ernesto Rodriguez, 212 Jefferson Parish, New Orleans, Louisiana, operated a Spanish school in New Orleans and had tape recordings of Spanish conversations by Oswald. Mrs. Rodriguez de Lopez stated her son is opposed to Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. According to T17, Ernesto Rodriguez, president of the Modern Language Institute, New Orleans, Louisiana, advised that Oswald contacted him on one occasion during the last week of July or early August 1963 and inquired concerning a Spanish language course offered at the Institute. Oswald did not take any courses, and Rodriguez has no tape recordings of Oswald's voice. He had no knowledge of Oswald's Spanish-speaking ability. And finally, dated March 12, 64, FBI document, Lee Harvey Oswald, background of inquiry. On November 28, 63, and again on March 6, 64, a confidential source abroad made available the original of passenger list or manifest relating to departure number 2, bus number 340, October 2nd, 63, of the Transportes Frontera bus line, which had its headquarters in Monterrey and its Mexico City terminal at Buena Vista Street number 7. The confidential source abroad advised that above-mentioned passenger list or manifest was clear evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald had departed from Mexico City on the bus connected therewith, which had left Mexico City at 1 p.m. and was scheduled to have arrived at Nuevo Laredo at 5:30 a.m. October 3rd. The information recorded on the passenger list is handwritten. The names are not complete and portions of it are not legible. However, the following constitutes an effort to produce as closely as possible the information which appears on the list. And of course, now that we have something pending, it cuts off right there. So as you'll notice, all of today was basically the miscellaneous incidents that allegedly involved Oswald. Some of them, I believe, have no bearing on anything at all, but some do, like the stuff involving Jack Frazier. Jack Frazier and his relationship to the guy I previously mentioned, which I hope you guys caught. That I'm going to have to do some additional work into. So, but that's going to do it for today, guys. I appreciate your tuning in. I've got plenty of softcover books. If you're interested in a signed softcover book, please hit me up. They're $50 shipped domestically. Also, I have new episodes of Bloody History World War II out, so I'd appreciate it if everybody would subscribe to those. And that's it for today, guys. I will see you guys tomorrow.